Jaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paschatya Desatarine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Sivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Each of these little home gatherings that we've been conducting, I've made a little appeal at the very beginning. Wear your mask appeal. The reason being, this past weekend, we had a really nice event, except for a number of people during the event contracted COVID, including children. So I'm a little wary. I'm safe, I think. But one of our GBC members who had two whatever you call it, what do you call it? Huh? Shots. 2 shots, 1 booster, and still contracted COVID when attending a wedding, nice event. He and his wife both, contracted COVID. He was down for 2 weeks, and so I don't want to have to go through that, and I wouldn't want anyone to go through that. So, do we have extra masks? Do you mind? So our host has some supply. Yesterday, we discussed chapter 60. So today we're going to discuss 61. Chapter 60 was Krishna teasing Rukmini. And now Rukmini and her brother Rukmi. And the chapter is Balarama slays Rukmi, but that's not where it starts, that's where it ends. And so actually what I'm going to be doing this evening is discussing one complete chapter and reviewing another one, the marriage of Rukmini. And Rukmi's involvement in that marriage with Rukmini. So at a certain point, a little review. Balaram plays a very important role in Krishna's pastimes from Vrindavan. And then again, we don't hear so much about their activities in Mathura, but he's involved for sure. The battle with Kalyavana and the running from the battlefield from Jarasandha. And we'll see, there's some nice paintings of Balaram doing Balaram's thing. One of the activities that Balaram likes is being a mediator. Kind of a go-between between two disputing parties and conflict mediation and resolution, right? He likes. And if people, he's very powerful, and if people are not respectful, they could have a problem. That's what happens with Rukmi. Previously, that's what happened with the residents of Hastinapur, right? Even before the Kurukshetra battle, even before the Kurukshetra battle. So, Balaram went to make peace with Duryodhana. And Balaram and Duryodhana were tight. They were close. Balaram taught him how to fight with a club for several years. And who can be a better club teacher, club fighting teacher than Balaram? But when Balaram went to make peace, and the standard of peace was to release Krishna's son. No. So Balaram was going to drag the whole city of Hastinapur into the Ganga, and they realized, don't mess with Balaram. So, he likes that role, he plays that role with the marriage of Rukmini. But we'll hear about that shortly. And anyway, well, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. Let's begin the chapter. So after Krishna's teasing Rukmini is all resolved, we hear about the vast family, it's a really big family, the dynasty of Krishna and his 16,108 queens. And the math is pretty simple. Each queen had 10 sons and 1 daughter. That's pretty unusual, right? Every one of them 10 sons and 1 daughter, 10 sons and 1 daughter. All 16,000, 10 sons and 1 daughter. And then they were married and they had their children, so it's a dynasty. Each of Lord Krishna's wives gave birth to 10 sons, who were not less than their father, having all his personal opulence. In the painting, we see Narada Muni coming to pay a visit. That's another chapter. Chapter 69. Because each of these princesses saw that Lord Achyuta never left her palace, each thought herself the Lord's favorite. These women did not understand the full truth about him. Now, for several reasons that are given. One is the influence of Yogamaya. I mean, it would make sense they must have talked to each other, but they didn't have a sense that Krishna married 16,100 or 108, and he only stayed in that one palace, their palace. But that was their understanding. Krishna liked them. Krishna loved them very much. And so much that when he came back from the Sudharma assembly hall, he didn't go to the other palaces, he went to hers. It's said in the commentary that also they didn't go out and about much because they were very attached to being with Krishna. So they didn't get a chance to see that Krishna was simultaneously in all the different palaces. But somehow, for how long did Krishna live in Dwaraka? We talked about this. He lived he was on the planet for 125 years. And he was subtract from the 125 the time that he was in Mathura and the time that he was in Vrindavan. And it leaves the time that he was in Dwaraka was just short of 100 years. Just short of 90 years. 90 years. So that's a long time. And they didn't figure it out. They must have talked to each other. Like, how's it going over there? And the 16,100 princesses, they all knew each other before they married Krishna, because they were all captive in the same place. In any case, they didn't know. And that was the arrangement of Yogamaya. The Supreme Lord's wives were fully enriched, enchanted by his lovely, lotus-like face, his long arms and large eyes, his loving glances, imbued with laughter, and his charming talks with them. But with all their charms, these ladies could not conquer the mind of the all-powerful Lord. And it's not so much they were trying to conquer, they had their charms, but their life was simply pleasing him. The arched eyebrows of these 16,000 queens enchantingly expressed those ladies' secret intentions through coyly smiling, sidelong glances. It said their eyebrows were like bows that sent arrows. But Krishna wasn't pierced by those arrows. Thus their eyebrows boldly sent forth conjugal messages, yet even with these arrows of Cupid, and with other means as well, they could not agitate Lord Krishna's senses. This, in other words, a transcendental loving exchange. Thus, these women obtained as their husband the master of the goddess of fortune, although even great demigods like Brahma do not know how to approach him. With ever-increasing pleasure, they felt loving attraction for him, enchanted, smiling glances with him, exchanged smiling glances with him, eagerly anticipated association with him in ever fresh intimacy, and enjoyed in many other ways. Now this is one of different rasas. One of the features of Srimad Bhagavatam is it gives stimulation for udipan. You know the term udipan? Udipan. Udipan is a term Amrita Sindhu, or nectar devotion. And there are different types of love, and there are different stimulations for different types of love. For those who Jiva Goswami, they know the whole panorama. At the same time, those who may be attracted to this type or that type, like those who might be attracted to the love of the cowherd boys for Krishna, or the love of Krishna for the cowherd boys, then hearing those activities, it stimulates that particular type of love. Or the attire of Mother Jasoda, the Damodar Leela, the flowers in her hair, and the particular color of her sari, and those descriptions, they make nice paintings, but in the science of rasa, they stimulate that particular type of love. And one is encouraged by Jiva Goswami to meditate upon and become a follower of devotee. Once it becomes awakened in one's heart that this is my eternal relationship with Krishna, such and such is I'm attracted to this relationship. And then one is encouraged to meditate upon the details, the smiles, the glances, the gestures, the words, the dress, everything. So what's going on here, I've been describing how the queens related with Krishna, it has that feature. There are those that have that attraction, the Dwarka queen feature of love, to be married to Krishna in the place of opulence. In one of the chapters I was discussing with the devotees in China, they were like, is this what we're supposed to, one of the questions, in the questions answer session and afterwards, supposing one has an attraction for this, what do you do? Rupa Goswami gives the teaching. So I'm just sharing. This narration stimulates a particular type of love because there's a particular exchange. So there's more. Although the Supreme Lord's queens each had hundreds of maidservants, they chose to personally serve the Lord by approaching him humbly, offering him a seat, worshipping him with excellent paraphernalia, bathing and massaging his feet, giving him pan to chew, fanning him, anointing him with fragrant sandalwood paste, adorning him with flower garlands, dressing his hair, arranging his bed, bathing him, and presenting him with various gifts. Now he doesn't need anything because he's the all-opulent Supreme, but still they wanted to do all these things. Among Lord Krishna's wives, each of whom had 10 sons, I previously mentioned 8 principal queens. This is chapter 61, and then there was 16,100 plus 8. I shall now recite for you the names of those 8 queens' sons, headed by Pradyumna. Now, I'm not going to read, but those verses shown here, verses 8 through 18, it's this queen and her 10 sons by name, that queen, her 10 sons by name, the next queen, and so forth. Pradyumna married Rukmi's daughter, Rukmavati. Okay. Just leave it. Okay. And what's up here is Pradyumna is the first. Pradyumna is listed first because Rukmini was the first queen and Pradyumna was the first son. So headed by Pradyumna, he's the elder amongst all these sons. And then next is this chapter, this chapter, Pradyumna marries Rukmi's daughter, who is named Rukmavati. But we're going to hear a little history of how that's a little strange. When Maharaj Parikshit hears this, what? Rukmi had his daughter Rukmavati marry Krishna's son? Wait a minute, how'd that happen? You'll hear the question. My dear king, the sons and grandsons of Lord Krishna's children numbered in the tens of millions. 16,000 mothers gave rise to this dynasty. So Maharaj Parikshit wants to ask, what? How could Rukmi give his daughter to his enemy's son? Who's his enemy? Krishna. After all, Rukmi had been defeated by Lord Krishna in battle and was waiting for an opportunity to kill him. More than an opportunity, he had taken a vow that he would kill him. Please explain this to me, O learned one, how these two inimical parties became united through marriage. And then he says something very nice. He's honoring, Maharaj Parikshit is honoring the position of Shukadeva Goswami as a mystical person, that he knows things that ordinary people don't know. Mystic yogis can perfectly see that which has not yet happened, as well as all things in the past or present, beyond the senses, remote or blocked by physical obstacles. No, I know that you know because you have this capacity. You're so spiritually elevated, you know. So please disclose. This is a big mystery. So, what chapter is this? This is chapter 61, right? We're going to go back to chapter 54, where Krishna and Rukmini become married. There's 3 chapters. Rukmi wants his sister, who's the youngest, there's a number of brothers, and then she's the youngest sister. He's the eldest brother, and Bhishmaka wanted his daughter to marry Rukmini. Rukmini wanted to marry Krishna. Rukmi didn't like Krishna. And he liked Shishupal. Shishupal. But he was then going to make a marriage arrangement for Shishupal. There's 3 chapters. I'm not going to tell the whole thing. And Rukmini was like, no way. I'm not going to marry Shishupal. And so she wrote a letter. A messenger delivered the letter. Krishna accepted her request. Come, take me away. Kidnap me. Here's how you can do it. She was very, very wise. At this and this and this and that and that and that. And don't come with your whole armies. Come alone. But your armies can come later because there's going to be a fight. And she did the whole logistics. And Krishna came. The messenger told her. He came back, said, Krishna's come. She was very happy. She went out to outside the city because she was so beautiful. She and other qualified ladies would not be seen by the public. But when she went outside to their goddess deity for offering respect before her wedding, on her wedding day, that's when Krishna came and scooped her up, put her on his chariot. Balaram had come. Balaram, here we go. Balaram plays an important part. Balaram heard about the armies of the envious personalities, Shishupal, Jarasandha, this one, that one, Shalva, so many kings. They all brought their armies. If Krishna comes and tries to interfere, we're going to finish him. So Balaram heard all this. You know, they didn't have text messages. They just had gossip, systems. So he heard. So he brought a massive Yadu army from Dwarka. It's ready for a showdown. So Krishna came right in the midst of everybody, scooped up Rukmini, put her on the chariot, and while people were trying to stop, he just carried her away. Seeing this happen, Rukmi was especially envious of Krishna. He could not bear the fact that Krishna had carried off his sister to marry her in the Rakshasa style. You see him on the left side with his sword. Krishna's taking Rukmini down the chariot. There's all those soldiers all over the place. So they all went charging after, trying to capture Krishna. The Lord laughed. Don't worry, Rukmini. Don't be afraid, beautiful-eyed one. this enemy force is about to be destroyed by your soldiers. It's like they're already married, although they're not yet married. But Rakshasa style, they're now husband, wife. And Balaram's going to take care of it. So Balaram with the Yadu army and his plow and his club, he went at it. Big battle scene. Lord Balaram and the other heroes then began to annihilate the opposing army with Naracha arrows. Being subdued by Krishna's army, Jarasandha and other princes consoled Shishupal. But Rukmi wasn't to be consoled. He went charging after Krishna, and he didn't get a good result. As Rukmi attacked Krishna, the Lord shot arrows that broke Rukmi's sword and shield into small pieces. He was then captured, and once he was captured, Krishna was ready to finish him right on the spot. Krishna took up his own sharp sword and prepared to kill Rukmi. But Rukmini prayed to Krishna to not slay her brother. There was a bond of affection. Even he was doing diabolical things and against her will, and she didn't want to get back. She wanted him to be protected. So what did Krishna do? Well, we see in the painting, he embarrassed Rukmi. Krishna tied up the evildoer with a strip of cloth. He then proceeded to disfigure Rukmi by comically shaving him, leaving parts of his mustache and hair. And it's embarrassing. It's humiliating. It's worse than being killed in one sense. So Balaram is going to play the mediator. Remember? He likes. Omniscient Balaram knew that Rukmi was the guilty party, but to encourage the lamenting Rukmini, he decided to gently reproach Sri Krishna. So he said a few things. There's several verses in a row. This is an abomination, very much contrary to our family tradition. Why? Because she's now his wife. She's not formally, officially, ceremonially married, but that's the arrangement. To cut someone's hair and shave his mustache and beard is almost comparable to killing him. Whatever Rukmi might have been, he is now our brother-in-law, a relative of our family, and you should not have put him in such a condition. So Krishna is consoling Rukmini, and now he's going to speak to transcendental teachings to Rukmini. She feels supported. Krishna has been reprimanded by his elder brother. Balaram instructed Rukmini as well that the reactions Rukmi was facing were solely due to his own misdeeds, and Rukmini should not be attached to bodily conceptions. Thus, Balaram reconciled the situation by his moral and ethical instructions to Rukmini and Krishna. So now, what's Rukmi feeling? Left with only his life heir, cast out by his enemies, and deprived of his strength and bodily radiance, Rukmi could not forget how he had been disfigured. In frustration, he constructed for his residence a large city, which he called Boja Kata, down the bottom, Boja Kata. That's where he took a great vow. What's the great vow? In a mood of angry frustration, Rukmi promised, I will not re-enter Kundina until I have killed wicked Krishna and brought back my younger sister. So there he lived in his Bhoja Kata capital. This becomes very important, for that was the basis of the question of Maharaj Parikshit. How did this happen? Look at this vow. And he's, intent on killing Krishna. And Krishna's son marries his daughter? How did he permit that? So meanwhile, Krishna went back to Dwarka with Rukmini, and he was received very nicely by the citizens. And in course of time, a marriage took place between Krishna and Rukmini, Krishna's first queen. So now we're going back to chapter 61, where the question was asked by Maharaj Parikshit to Shukadeva Goswami, please explain, how did this happen? Shukadeva Goswami said, at her Swayamvar ceremony, Rukmavati herself chose Pradyumna, who was the re-embodiment of Cupid. Did we discuss this the other day? Yes. Some of you maybe were not present. The first son of Rukmi, you know the answer. The first son of Krishna and Rukmini was Pradyumna. Pradyumna, the first son of Krishna and Rukmini. Now, this Pradyumna, not only was he one of the 4 Chaturvyuha forms of the Lord in the spiritual world, just as Krishna descended, another of the Chaturvyuha forms descended as Pradyumna. So Vasudeva, Sankarshan, that's Balarama, Pradyumna, that's his son, and Aniruddha, that's Pradyumna's son. That's the Chaturvyuha. So listen, try to go slowly. That original Pradyumna of the spiritual world had a partial expansion. The Pradyumna of the spiritual world is the original Cupid, but there's a partial expansion as the demigod Cupid, or Kamadeva. We're going to see something about that in just a moment. So that partial expansion, Kamadeva, was burned into ashes by Lord Shiva because he took one of his arrows and was going to try to test it out on Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva, before he released his arrow, saw what he was up to, and he burned his body into ashes. That was the end of that partial expansion body, but what about the soul? So the soul merged back into the original Pradyumna. So when Pradyumna took his birth on earth as Rukmini and Krishna's son, he's both the expansion, Kamadeva, and the original Pradyumna, the original Cupid. That's Krishna's son. So Rukmavati, the daughter of Rukmini's brother, Rukmavati wanted to marry Pradyumna. Cupid, come on. And during her Swayamvar ceremony, she selected Krishna. But, then the others that were suitors that wanted to have her hand in marriage, they challenged Pradyumna. Although he fought alone on a single chariot, Pradyumna defeated the assembled kings in battle and took her away. Here's a detail. Rukmi understood from his daughter, before the Swayamvar was arranged, he understood from his daughter who she wanted to marry. princes had privileges. This was one of them. They would identify who they wanted to marry. He was like, forget it. But she wouldn't forget it. And so that he would not have the public think that he was endorsing his daughter marrying Krishna's son, he arranged for a Swayamvar. And at the Swayamvar, if she selected who she wanted as her husband, he was not going to be criticized publicly for allowing that, because it was a Swayamvar. And who knows, maybe some of the kings that also wanted to marry her would defeat him. So it was like, that's what the Swayamvar was arranged for, those two purposes. That's what our commentators say. Here's something that Jiva Goswami writes in Krishna Sandarbha. What's Krishna Sandarbha? Krishna Sandarbha is one of the 6 essential doctrines that encompass the whole of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So I'm not going to give you a Sandarbha lesson just now, but it's a very important Sandarbha. I'll give something you probably all know, but I'll remind you. Could you not do that? Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana. Anyone here not familiar with those 3 terms? Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana. You all know. Anyone want an explanation? Okay. So do you know what the word sambandha means? It means relationship. Relationship. What do I know? But there's a similar word in Hindi and the similar word in Sanskrit, sambandha. Sambandha means relationship. So the relationship is, there's a source of everything, and there's a relationship of everything with that source. To understand the relationship of everything with its source of emanation, that's sambandha. And we're part of everything. The jiva, the living entity. So the second category is acting in that relationship. So sambandha, then acting in the relationship, that's called abhideya. Sambandha, abhideya. And then when you act in your relationship with the source of everything, something happens. There's a fruition, a fruit, a mature stage of acting in that relationship, and that's prayojana, or love. Sambandha, relationship. Acting in the relationship, abhideya. The fruit, prayojana, the mature stage of our loving relationship with Krishna. Prema prayojana. You know prema. Prayojana. It's the mature result of acting in a relationship. So in the category over here, sambandha, there's 4 parts in Jiva Goswami's writings. First is just establishing simple definitions called Tattva Sandarbha. Next is Paramatma Sandarbha. Paramatma Sandarbha is describing the ontology, or the realities of the jiva, and how the jivas are acting under the supersoul, and what's the relationship between the jiva and the supersoul. Relationship. And then relationship between supersoul and prakriti. So, Paramatma Sandarbha. That's number 2 of 4. And then Bhagavat Sandarbha, and that is the one who's the all opulent supreme, Bhagavat Sandarbha. And finally is Krishna Sandarbha, that's this one. Krishna Sandarbha is the source of all expansions and the features of Bhagavan, or Vishnu Tattva, that's Krishna. And that's the 4 that make up Sambandha, means relationship, Sambandha. So in this Jiva Goswami's Krishna Sandarbha, he gives this explanation that Cupid is one of the eternal associates of Lord Krishna. So there's the eternal Cupid, and there's the partial expansion in the form of the demigod Cupid, or Kamadev. Another name for the same is Smara. More common is Kamadev. So she was attracted. Rukmavati was attracted. And so she selected Pradyumna, and Pradyumna fought off all the, other kings and suitors to have Rukmavati as their wife. Though Rukmi always remembered his enmity toward Lord Krishna, who had insulted him. Remember, he cut off his mustache and hair and sent him away. In order to please his sister, he sanctioned his daughter's marriage to his nephew, to Krishna's nephew, to Krishna's son, or now Pradyumna. Then there's a little verse. It's just a hint. O king, this is Shukadev to Maharaj Parikshit. Bali, the son of Kritavarma, married Rukmini's young daughter, large-eyed Charumati. So the subtext is, in the commentaries, by that one statement, it's indicating all the queens had one daughter, and arrangements were needed to be made for the marriage of the 16,108 daughters to be married to someone. So that's part of the dynasty. That, big dynasty. You like Krishna book stories. So what can you tell us about Kritavarma? Kritavarma. What do you remember about Kritavarma? He was a resident of Dwarka, right? He was involved in the Shamataka jewel story, right? Oh, yeah. And how was he involved in the Shamataka jewel story? Here, I'll remind you.
Yeah, so...
Go ahead.
Was he the one who killed Shakti?
He's the one.
Yeah.
So there were two. Krishna requested Satyajit. Satyajit was the father of Satyabhama. Krishna had requested Satyajit before his marriage. He requested Satyajit to give the jewel to the king. He didn't want the jewel for himself. He wanted Satyajit to become freed from pride, because was he proud. And the answer was no. I want the 170 pounds of gold every day, thank you. So I didn't give the jewel. So later, when he started accusing Krishna of having killed his brother, Prasena was his brother, Krishna had to prove his innocence, and then he returned the jewel back to Satyajit. And that's when Satyajit said, boy, all the people of Dwarka are going to be mad at me because I offended Krishna. So I better do something. So I'll give the jewel back to Krishna, and I'll give my daughter, Satyabhama. And Krishna said, you keep the jewel, I'll take your jewel daughter. And they married. But then later, the very next chapter, there were two, see if you can remember the names, there were two that were talking about, this isn't right, Satyajit shouldn't keep the jewel. So if the two spoke to Kritavarma, go get the jewel in the middle of the night. There was Akrura. Who was the other person involved? Akrura? Satyaki? Satyaki? Akrura and? I can't remember either. Shatadanva. 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 Thank you. Shatadanva. That created problems for Akrura. Akrura had to leave town. That's a long another story. But that's who Kritavarma. He was a powerful person who lived in Dwaraka, and he had a son named Bali, and Bali married Krishna and Rukmini's daughter. His son married their daughter. Their daughter's name was Charumati. Her name Charumati, a commentary says, she had very big eyes. And it was a sign of auspiciousness. So the unspoken is that each queen had, in addition to 10 sons, 1 daughter. Rukmi agreed to the marriage of his granddaughter. The granddaughter is the daughter of Pradyumna and Rukmavati. He had a granddaughter. The granddaughter's name was Rochana. And Rochana was married to Rukmini's grandson, Aniruddha. Ooh. Despite Rukmini's relentless feud with Lord Hari. This is Shukadev Goswami narrating. Although Rukmi considered this marriage irreligious, he wanted to please his sister, bound as he was by the ropes of affection. So there's a lot of brother-sister sibling affection between Rukmi and Rukmini. His sister married someone who he was at enmity with even before she married, what to speak of afterwards. He has taken a vow to kill her husband. And now his daughter is marrying and his granddaughter is marrying into the same line. Her sister's children and grandchildren. So, it was agreed. Rochana was going to marry Aniruddha. Now, Aniruddha had another queen, Usha, right? Usha and Aniruddha. Yeah. Oh, you're our Krishna book king. Thank you. He knows his stuff, mostly. Except Shatadanva. You have to read a little more. It's summer time, so you can read a bunch and you can get really, really good at it. Shatadanva. Usha and Aniruddha. Usha and Aniruddha. Usha was the daughter of Banasura, right? That's another story. Usha and Aniruddha. It's a really nice story. Really nice. In Chitralekha. Okay, so let's go. On the joyous occasion of that marriage, that's Rochana and Aniruddha, Queen Rukmini, Lord Balaram, Lord Krishna, and several of the Lord's sons, headed by Samba and Pradyumna, went to the city of Bojakata, the residence of Rukmi. That's the city of Bojakata. Can't tell so well, but that's what it is. The Krishna's there, and everybody's there. Krishna's over here. Here he's coming down at the bottom. Oops. He's coming in the chariot. See him there? And then there he's being received, and so forth and so on. After the wedding, a group of arrogant kings headed by the king of Kalinga told Rukmi, you should defeat Balarama at dice. The king, Rukmi, was known to be really good at dice. And Balaram was known to be not so good at dice. But he really liked it. He liked competition of any kind. And they thought we won't be able to defeat Krishna. So he's not expert at dice, O king, but he's still quite addicted to it. Thus advised, Rukmi challenged Balaram and began a gambling match with him. And the other kings had brought with them piles and piles and piles and piles of riches, jewels and gold and ornaments, and it was part of their plan. And their plan specifically was that because Krishna can't be defeated, Balaram can be defeated, and they wanted Rukmi to take from Balaram all his possessions. Kings, a challenging spirit. Okay, so they get ready for the gambling match. I don't know how this game works, but this is often depicted in the format for somehow playing dice. In that match, Lord Balaram first accepted a wager of 100 coins, then 1,000, then 10,000. Rukmi won this first round, and the king of Kalinga laughed loudly at Balaram, showing all his teeth. Guess what? He's going to get his teeth knocked out. Lord Balaram could not tolerate this. They're laughing at him. Next, Rukmi accepted a bet of 100,000 coins, which Lord Balaram won. But Rukmi tried to cheat, declaring, "I am the winner," shaking with anger. Like the ocean on a full moon day, handsome Lord Balaram, his naturally reddish eyes, even redder in his fury, accepted a wager of 100 million gold coins. 100 million gold coins. That's a lot of gold coins. Just then, a voice from the sky declared, "Balaram has fairly won this wager. Rukmi is surely lying." A voice from the sky. The kings advised him, don't pay attention to that voice from the sky. There's the voice from the sky, by the way. And so, here's Rukmi. Urged by the wicked kings, Rukmi ignored the divine voice. In fact, destiny itself was urging Rukmi on, and thus he ridiculed Lord Balaram as follows. Lord Balaram fairly won this wager also, but Rukmi again resorted to cheating and declared, "I have won. Let these witnesses here say what they saw." Rukmi said, "You cowherds who wander about the forests know nothing about dice. Playing with dice and sporting with arrows is only for kings, not for the likes of you." That was the wrong thing to do. Thus insulted by Rukmi and ridiculed by the kings, Lord Balaram was provoked to anger. In the midst of the auspicious wedding assembly, he raised his club and struck Rukmi dead. The king of Kalinga, who had laughed at Lord Balaram and shown his teeth, tried to run away, but the furious Lord quickly seized him on his 10th step and knocked out all his teeth. Now see Krishna over on the right, he's just sitting there very calmly, tormented by Lord Balaram's club. The other kings fled in fear, their arms, thighs, and heads broken, and their bodies drenched in blood. When his brother-in-law Rukmi was slain, Lord Krishna neither applauded nor protested, O king, for he feared jeopardizing his affectionate ties with either Rukmini or Balaram. He just was neutral. Then the descendants of Dasharha, headed by Lord Balaram, seated Aniruddha and his bride, Rochana, on a fine chariot and set off from Bhojakata for Dwarka. Having taken shelter of Lord Madhusudana, they had fulfilled all their purposes. That's the end of the story. So, the title of the chapter, as you recall, was Balaram slays Rukmi. Now, Balaram knew, let's go back, he knew that Rukmi was wrong, but he played this peacemaker role. And he knew when he was playing dice with Rukmi was wrong. Now, the commentators say, in normal circumstances, Balaram would just be impervious to these things. But there's obviously a transcendental purpose. His anger wasn't like a worldly person's anger. We shouldn't think like that. The anger was for a purpose. It was the purpose of Krishna's descent. Any of you young devotees here in the front row, you know Bhagavad Gita verse that says why Krishna descended? Can you recite it? Boy, I pushed the button.
And to annihilate the mysteries and to establish the religion, and he comes millennium after millennium.
Very good. So there's three reasons. Pritranaya sadhunam. Sadhu means saintly person. Pritranaya sadhunam, to give protection to the sadhus. Vinash, annihilate, destroy, stop the bad conduct of the Duskritis. So Rukmi is one of them. Look at his friends, Shishupal and Jarasandha and Shalva and all the wicked people. Those were his buddies. He was like them, vowed to kill Krishna. He's a villain. So Balaram was assisting. His anger was part of the purpose of Krishna's appearance. And he could have just tolerated, but he didn't. And he finished him, which is part of Krishna's purpose in appearing. For one who does something bad like that, just to tolerate, it's like a little bit like, it's not the same, but it's a little bit like Krishna's dealing with the washerman. Yeah, you know the story. When Krishna was entering into Mathura, he wanted the cowherd boys to be attired suitably for entering into Mathura. They're going into the big city. And they're used to like little boys doing little boy things out in the forest or the pasturing ground. So he wanted them to have some nice clothes. So he spoke very sweetly. Read the verse. My dear sir, would you kindly provide some clothing for my friends? Because we're going to enter the city and we should be dressed nicely. Do you know who you're speaking to? I'm the service of the king. And if the king came to know that you asked, you would be dead. So you Be off with you now while you still have your life intact. And he said some insulting things about the cowherd boys. Krishna didn't like that. Krishna didn't like that. You have something?
And then
he used just the tips of his fingers, and separated the blaspheming part of his body from the rest of his body. And the same tips of his fingers he used with Kubja. And she was a hunchback, and whoop, she made her straight. And by the touch of his fingertips, she became very beautiful. Read the Sanskrit, and you'll find that Krishna said almost the same thing, word for word, to the weaver. And the weaver's response was devotional. Yes. So, Krishna's neutral, and how we receive Krishna and regard Krishna makes all the difference between this benediction or that benediction. Because the washerman, listen carefully, the washerman was liberated. Not just like he was decapitated, but he achieved liberation. How fortunate. How many people are striving for salvation, liberation, for lifetimes, doing austerities and this and that, and just come in contact with Krishna and you're liberated. How fortunate. But more than liberation is devotional service. Say it again. More than liberation is devotional service. Yeah. It's beyond. The platform of devotional service begins from the platform of liberation and goes further. It's a very important teaching. A very important teaching. There's a nice expression of this in Bhagavad Gita. I'm just going to end with this after finishing this little thing. Chapter 6 of Bhagavad Gita is Dhyan Yoga. Dhyan Yoga. Dhyan is one of the stages of meditation. Dhyan Dharana Samadhi. And in Dhyan Yoga chapter, there's a little few verses, 20 through 22 or something like that, that describe the stage of Samadhi, Dhyan Dharana Samadhi. And that stage of Samadhi is where the mind is fixed. There's the practice, when we're chanting japa, we're supposed to be attentive. Bit of a struggle, isn't it? So, but you practice and practice, and you're really sincere in your practice, and gradually, by practice, abhyasa yoga yuktena, your practice becomes better. And when that stage of samadhi is reached, a really wonderful purport, I like. Prabhupada explained in the purport that the first two stages of chanting bring one to the stage of liberation. The first two stages of chanting from Shikshastaka, Cheto Darpana Marjanam, that's the heart becomes cleansed of unwanted things, dust on the mirror of the mind. Cheta Darpana Marjanam. The next one, Bhava Mahadavagni Nirvapanam, the blazing fire of material existence is extinguished. Prabhupada explains that's the stage that the Buddhists aspire for, called nirvana. Nirvana is the goal of Buddhism. Prabhupada explains that's achieved in the first two stages of the 7 stages of chanting. And then what happens after nirvana? What happens after liberation is the actual activity of the soul. It's described in the Bhagavatam this way. It's right there in the purport. The Swarupena Vyavastati, Muktir, Mukti, liberation. Muktir Hitvanyata Rupam, form, in your spiritual form. Svarupena vyavastati, being situated. Situated in your spiritual form, you do spiritual activities. That's beyond liberation. So if you're engaged in devotional service, that's beyond liberation. It's liberation is already included, and then you go beyond liberation. Who are we? We're like, how fortunate are we? How unqualified are we? And yet, how fortunate are we to be engaged in devotional service? We have a long way to go to the stage of mature devotional service. But you stay with the process of devotional service faithfully, carefully, devotionally, attentively, and that stage of maturity will come where we're with Krishna. But until that stage where we're with Krishna, Krishna's accepting our service. It's beyond liberation stage already. It's really quite amazing. It's a very merciful process. And what we just did for the past hour and some minutes is devotional service, hearing the pastimes of Krishna and his loving associates, and Balaram and his assisting Krishna in his pastimes. We're transported by sound vibration. We're transported into direct contact with Krishna, his qualities, his form, his activities, his loving entourage, his holy abode, Dwarka, and so forth. His name, how many times we said his name, Balaram's name. That's devotional service. Slowly, slowly, purification, along with the rest of the things that we do in our life. And this is the last. Sambandha, looking at this young girl who was like trying to capture that word, sambandha. If we remember the relationship of the kitchen and the house and the friends of the family and the community and Fort Lauderdale and the place where we are, that this is all in relation to Krishna. And if we move about, little souls moving about that which is in relation to Krishna, we can be reminded of opportunities for serving Krishna at every step. If we're not seeing the opportunity to serve Krishna at every step, it's unfortunate. We lose that good fortune. We're thinking instead of how to be enjoyers of the house and the kitchen and the, my friends and family and stuff, my paraphernalia and my enjoyable objects. Krishna consciousness takes one on the other side of that allurement. And the primary method is sound. Okay. So let's see if there's some discussion. We have a little portable microphone, right? Yeah. Okay. I know I can count on you for some questions. Here's the microphone, right? Look at that.
Thank you, Maharaj, for this wonderful class and stand of the Lord. I have a question about the liberation of the washerman. He got liberation, so did he get like Sayuja kind of liberation?
Sayuja. There's the statement made by our acharyas that says, generally, that's those who are killed by Krishna achieve that kind of liberation. There are other types, but that's the common one. I mean, who are some other ones? Putana, for example. Putana is another example. So some will achieve some other type of liberation, but that's standard.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Maharaj, on the last slide, it mentioned descendant of Dasara. Where did Dasara place come from?
Dasarha is one of the kings in the dynasty, the previous ancestors. Sometimes we hear Vrishni, sometimes Andaka, sometimes Boja, sometimes Dasharha. So I don't have the lineage, the chart, the family chart, but he's one of the ancestor kings in that royal dynasty.
So Krishna and Balaram, they were born in the cowherd family, right? So
No, they were born as sons of Vasudeva and Devaki. So that's the line. Now, the cowherd community is connected to that line, but that's a detail. One of the kings had two queens. One of the queens was in the Vaishya community. So the sons became Vaishyas. And another queen was in the Kshatriya family. They became Kshatriyas. There's some detail, but that's the principle. So although Krishna, when he was with the Nanda and Yasoda, Nanda is connected to that family. Nanda and Vasudeva not just were friends, they were connected, cousins. Okay. Someone else?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So in the story we heard that they were like cousins were being married, and also like king would have multiple wives, and in Mahabharata Draupadi had multiple. I mean Draupadi was a different scenario, but like weddings within the cousins. So that wasn't, if it was the Sanatan, then why is it not now?
Once upon a time, there was a devotee couple that explained this to me. They're South Indian, and he and she, husband and wife, were cousins. And I was like, what? And then they explained the detail of this combination is not okay, that combination is auspicious. And I couldn't follow it. And I don't think it's just a South Indian thing. I think it's a Vedic culture thing. And I can't answer the question because I couldn't follow it. But, in some ways and that's today, in our modern day. So those who are followers of Vedic culture, in some cases it's auspicious. Now, modern science may look at it as DNA combinations or something or other or something or other or something or other. And that's, it's not good. But, then besides not good DNA, there's, religious and irreligious, or auspicious or inauspicious. So I don't have the answer to that because I don't follow all that stuff. When it's okay, when it's not okay. Marriages between boys and girls. When there's bloodlines. Some it's okay, some it's not okay. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Take the mask off while you speak.
I said, if I understood correctly, yogis make like 100 and 1,000 years of meditation to attain liberation. But you just said in this 1 hour that we hear here is devotional service. I'm just making a little comparison just to understand if I'm correct. This 1 hour is worth more, most probably, than 100 and 1,000 of years of meditation, because bhakti and devotional give higher than liberation.
It's not what I said, but you can infer that. And a lot of making such a comparison has to do with the attentiveness of the meditator and the attentiveness of the bhakta. Because an inattentive bhakta might do lifetimes of bhakti and not get the result because of the inattention. There's a qualitative feature to bhakti, but the potency of bhakti is there regardless of one's attentiveness. Just like the heat from a stove, from, say you have a electric stove or a gas stove, and you're making fire or whatever, a cooking place. The closer you put the pot to the cooking place, the more quickly the pot is going to boil. If you put the pot many, many feet above the heat surface, it's going to take a long time. So attentiveness has a big, being attentive when engaging, and devotional, because devotion drives attentiveness and sustains attentiveness. That's going to make the difference in response to your question. The 1 hour spent together has the potential, the potency to achieve what you said. I'm just qualifying your statement.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. The question is about the scriptures. So Priyavrata Maharaj and everyone, they used to rule the entire earth planet. So how come the scriptures are only available part of India, but not how they were not spread entire world? Because
during what period of time are you speaking? Because during Vedic time, when the kings ruled the earth, people knew Vedic culture around the earth. Is that what here's something that two somethings that I've learned. Sadhaputta, you know who that person is? Richard Thompson, the scientist, the Bhaktivedanta Institute, Richard Thompson, Sadhaputta. You don't know who he is. You don't know who he is. Okay, I'll introduce you to him. He, Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj, and a few others were given the assignment by Prabhupada to start the Bhaktivedanta Institute. One of the services that Prabhupada gave to Sadhaputta was to study Srimad Bhagavatam and make a plan for the Vedic planetarium based upon 5th canto Srimad Bhagavatam. So he worked on it for like 10, 15 years. In my words, this is my opinion, in my lifetime, he's the closest person I've met to a genius. He's a very amazing person. And one of the things he did to fulfill that instruction of Srila Prabhupada was he wrote a book, and a series of books on this topic, Vedic Cosmology and Cosmography, or something like that. Vedic Cosmology and Cosmography, something like that. It's not a big, thick book, but one of the things that there's a chapter that indicates his research in cosmology around the world. And he shows images and gives examples that there's a universal cosmology picture all around the globe. And scholars have seen that, others before him, from Siberia to South America to Southeast Asia to Norway, and China and this and that, it's the same images. The language is different, but the same picture. So he writes in that chapter, scholars have come up with 3 possible explanations. And they rule out the first 2 because they're not reasonable. The human being is just wired to have cosmology like that. Not so likely. Or it's just coincidence. Not so likely. Or there was once a culture that spread throughout the world that shared commonality in cosmology. They didn't like it. But it was the more plausible of the three. And in fact, there was just in terms of that one item, cosmology, because, people look at the stars in the sky and wonder what's out there. So how does this universe structure? That's cosmology. Similarly, in the year 2010, I visited China for the first time. And one of the places I went was Beijing. And when I went to Beijing, the devotees were saying, "You want to go see the tourist sites?" I said, "No." "Oh, come on, we want to they really wanted to take me. I said, "Okay, let's go." And then they gave me some choices. And the one that sounded more interesting was the Temple of Heaven. Really? In Beijing, the Temple of Heaven? So let's go there. So we went inside, and I'm just sharing. I spent many, many years, I didn't grow up in New York City, but I spent many years in New York City, so I'm used to seeing lots of people. We went to a park on a Tuesday afternoon. You have to pay to get inside, and there were a zillion people. It was more than, the subway station at rush hour in New York City. There was a zillion people swarming the place on a Tuesday afternoon. What's it like on a holiday? So we went inside. There's a long walkway. There's three kind of hillocks, not big. And you walk up a long flight of steps, and you go upstairs. And the main attraction is the Temple of Heaven. And you have to stand in line to get to see the thing. And as you go inside, it's demigod worship. There's the King of Heaven. There's the sun god. There's the moon god. There's the fire god. Then they would make offerings to the demigods. What? And that's like a public park in Beijing. And they don't do that anymore. It's like, I don't know how they see it fits into their history. But it was one time, Karma Kanda rituals was part of the culture of ancient China. I was very surprised. And then the next mound was cosmology. And it's Vedic cosmology, but it's Chinese cosmology. The language is different, but the model is the same. And the third one was where they would, not the king, what do they call the ruler, whatever they call the ruler, I forget what they call the ruler. They would go in a geometric pattern with numerology and a big thing, and they'd talk to the King of Heaven. And they had the fasting place over there before they went to go talk to the King of Heaven. I mean, maybe they observed Ekadasi. I mean, maybe they observed Pandava Nirjala Ekadasi. Who knows? I don't know. We're going to, that's for sure. But there was a culture all over the world. Time destroys all things. And time is going to keep marching along and destroying other things too. So, they're preserving, uplifting and preserving principles. It may diminish, and it will diminish and diminish and diminish. But it was one time all over the world. Perhaps in a corrupted form, like when Parshuram sent the kings in different directions. The things became corrupted because the kings were corrupted. You with me? Yeah. Yeah. Where was Gandhari from? Kandahar. Does it sound like Kandahar? It's Afghanistan. Today it's Kandahar. It's Kandahar, but then it was Gandhar. It's part of Vedic culture. And on and on. Go ahead. Say your next thing.
So, Maharaj, when we read the scriptures, even Chaitanya Leela, when we read Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was offering oblations to forefathers. So, what is the difference between forefathers and pitras? So, both are same? Or?
Same.
Okay,
It says that one's in English and the other is a Sanskrit term.
So, where do they reside? Is the forefather meaning our ancestors, or like
It's a little complicated, but you're asking, so get ready for a complicated. It's not that all your ancestors, it's not that all of our ancestors go to Pitraloka. Some may, but ancestors may or may not, very rarely go to Pitraloka. But there are some that go to Pitraloka. And the oblations to the ancestors or pitris can be those that go to Pitraloka or those that don't. Because some don't, most don't. But if they do, then they're dependent. It's a little involved. Those that go to Pitraloka because they're attached to their ancestors. And then the eldest son is to offer oblations to the forefathers. Now, all of that's kind of all over the place these days, but that's the procedure. And when oblations are offered to the forefathers in Pitraloka, then they get nourished. But if the elder son does not offer oblations to the ancestors in Pitraloka, they suffer terribly. And they become good recruit candidates for Yamadutas because they're suffering so much. They're very eager to punish people who have been sinful or neglecting Vedic culture. But if they are regularly receiving pinda from their ancestors downline, then they may take birth again in that same family from Pitraloka. The cycle. So they go there, and they may go back, they may go down, and they may stay there for some time. That's Pitraloka. But not all of your ancestors or mine are in Pitraloka. They're in some other life form, most commonly. So the offering is offering of Vishnu Prasad, and so that's good for any soul.
Maharaj, then like what is our duty, like if our ancestors,
Well, are you the eldest son? So then you don't have a duty. That's Vedic culture. I mean, people may do whatever they do, but I'm just saying what Vedic culture says. It's for... Now, there are procedures in Vedic culture when some family member departs, and in certain periods of time after that family member departs, there's some ritual that one may do. But it's not exactly the worship of ancestors or making pinda offerings to ancestors. Not exactly the same thing. So what should you, back to your question, what should you do about family members, previous generation family members who have departed? What are you to do? That's really what your question is. In their honor, you distribute Krishna Prasadam. Very simple. You sponsor a Sunday feast somewhere, and in the honor of your just departed relative, family member, ancestor, whatever it is. And the benefit, spiritual benefit, will go to them. Which is different than offering pinda to ancestors. The karma kanda ritual. Yes.
Maharaj, Tanur Pranam.
Hare Krishna.
I have a follow-up question with Saranga Prabhuji. So, how do we improve our attention and?
Oh, small topic.
It's very difficult, Maharaj.
Well, abhyasa yoga yuktena cetasa nanyagamino. That's how. Or in the language of Bhagavad Gita, by constant practice of detachment. The detachment means attachment to Krishna. So it's our life project. And by generally framing your life in a mode of goodness and devotional way, it will help. It creates a nice incubation chamber for focused devotional practice, starting with chanting. It's not a guarantee. It's just a evolving, gradual process of focusing. Then, when it's time for your japa, it's the most important part of your life. It's the most important part of your day. The most important part of your life is undistracted, strive for undistracted chanting. And, there's different techniques and tips and, methods that work well for this person, that person, the other person. According to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the number one important ingredient is the effort you make. When you make effort, you realize what you just said. It's difficult, or I can't do this on my own. So then then you start calling for mercy in a way that you weren't before because you're distracted. So effort and mercy. Start with maximum effort in being attentive, because it's the most important thing. There's many, many things to say about this. There are japa retreats that go on forever on the how-to. And the key element is your effort. Abhyasa. From whatever and wherever the mind wanders. And how long, how many times? N number of times. Why? Because it's important. It's the key to success. Upcoming, very soon, is Pandava Nirjala Ekadasi. If you want to improve your japa, really get focused on Pandava Nirjala Ekadasi. Prepare mentally, emotionally, time management-wise, and maximize your attentiveness, maximize numerical chanting, etc. And that's a step in the direction. It's not, okay, now I'm there. It's a step in the direction on such an auspicious day. Okay, it looks like we're done. Oh, way in the back.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you very much for the wonderful class. Maharaj, you mentioned about the 7 stages of purification for the chanting. You mentioned two stages.
Chaita Darpana Marjanam, Bhava Mahadava Agni Nirvapanam. The other 5.
Yes, Maharaj. Can you little elaborate on the
Oh,
next one?
that's a whole class.
Thank you.
That's a seminar, but at least it's a whole class to elaborate. I don't mind. Another time. We can do that one. Another time. Okay.
Thank you, Maharaj.
I'll tell you what. I'll ask a devotee who has access to all the recordings that I have, and that's been a topic for at least 5 or 6. I'll get a few recordings, video recordings, and send that link to Sharanga, and he can send it to you. So then you can have a whole class on the topic. Send it to the group if you want. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.